Hello, I'm back with another tutorial, and this is for the it's called a Mercato Mercato tote bag by A Quaint Stitch patterns, and this is one that I've already made. And yes, it's a tote bag, and when I was asked to test it, I thought, well, once you've made one tote bag, it's just a couple of rectangles with a couple of straps. What's different? Well, there are quite a few differences, and I absolutely was thoroughly impressed with it. So I thought I'd make a tutorial because there are a few little things that people may find a little bit hard to understand initially, such as this lovely boxed corner that we have. It just looks really different, so I'll be showing you how to make that. Also, this floating pocket that's in there, French seams on the inside, and really nice sturdy handles, and the secret to what we add into them. So this is how it is. This is a medium size. It comes in 3 sizes. And the end results are the sizes that we'll end up with are quite ample. The large size is 17 by 17 inches, the medium is 12 by 14, and the small is 10.5 by 10.5. So as I say, this was the medium size. And I did use rivets just to give her the added strength to the handles. You don't need to use rivets. You can always do that crossed corner box, so you've got the box square and then the crosses. You could do that. I'll be covering it all anyway during the tutorial, and that's why I'm making a tutorial about it, because it is slightly different to the usual tote. So what we need to do first of all is we need to cut our rectangles, and because I'm doing the large, I've cut 2 rectangles that are 24 by 44 inches. And it does show you on the pattern that where to have the selvage, which is the edge of the fabric. So it shows you to have the selvage at the top and bottom, and then you're going across or down from the top of the selvage 44 inches. But there is a diagram on the tutorial there, which shows you exactly where the selvage needs to be, etc. So I'm actually using the same fabric for the lining as I have done on the outer. So I've cut 2 panels, 44 by 24. Then for the pocket panel, you need to do one that's 16 by 10 inches, and then 2 straps that are 20 by 3 inches. Now this fabric, it's an upholstery fabric. It's a bit thicker than the bog standard cotton. It's woven, but it's a bit of a loose weave. So I found that it was going to fray rapidly. So I used my overlocker when I cut the rectangles, etc. out, so that I've sealed the edges, so to speak. So that's probably why you're seeing all the stitching, or that is why you're seeing all the stitching. And then we've got our secret weapon, is webbing, 1 inch wide webbing, that we're going to put inside the straps. And Nipa, the lovely lady who is A Quaint Stitch patterns, she did this. She said to use it, and I thought, that's genius. I've been making bags for 8 years, and I've not once thought of using webbing. I know some of you may have, but I hadn't thought of it. And I think it's lovely to use in the handles, because if we use Peltex and other stabilisers, they get crushed eventually, and they don't really give you any strength. Whereas these, it doesn't crush, it keeps its shape and its body and strength. So that's all you need. There's no hardware needed unless you want to add rivets to the bottom of the handles. But this is a hardware-free zone, which is fantastic. Depending on the fabric you use, depends whether you use stabilisers. or interfacing. I haven't used any interfacing. This is, at the end of the day, a shopping bag that I'm going to chuck in the car, and because it's thicker than normal cotton, it's like a soft canvas, this is, I don't need to run to the expense of interfacing. So if you don't want to use interfacing, don't. So this is a cheap as chips bag to make. I mean, literally, this fabric I bought 60 inches wide, and I bought like something like 10 meters for £5 from a factory warehouse place. I mean, I just bought bucket loads of it. So this bag it's not even going to cost me 50p to make, which is brilliant. So forget the shop bags. You can make one cheaper probably if you look around for some good folk fabric. So yeah, so that's it. A nice inexpensive bag to make, and it's one you can call your own and be proud of. So without further ado, I shall get started with the tutorial. The first thing we need to do are the straps. Now, in the tutorial it says to cut the webbing 20 inches long, as same as the straps. However, what I did find was, because we put the straps on upside down, so they're like that, then you fold them up on themselves, and that makes a very, very thick strap at that point. And my machine didn't have any problems because it's an industrial machine, but if you've got a domestic machine, it may not go through these thick layers. So I thought if you cut it shorter, then you won't have that problem. You'll only be folding the webbing. Well, you won't be folding the webbing, it'll be going like that. So you'll only have one layer of webbing. So you need to cut it 3 inches shorter than the handle, because you're going to have 1.5 inches at each end. So I've cut mine 17 inches. And yes, I'm using brown webbing. It doesn't matter what colour, because it's not going to be seen. And I had a lot of this that I used for a brown bag I made, a backpack. And I haven't used it since, and I'm probably not going to use it because I don't tend to use brown very often. So rather than use my black one that I use a lot, I thought I'd just get rid of this one. So we heat seal the ends with a flame just to stop them fraying, and put them aside. And now what we want to do is to fold them in half lengthways, and then we're going to stitch down the sides. I believe 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to have to check that before I do it, and I shall let you know. I'm going to check what it is. Okay, I was wrong. It's not 1/4 inch, it's 3/8 inch seam allowance. So we stitch right sides together. That was something I should have said. You're stitching with the right sides together. And we need to do both. Here we have the unturned strap, and here I've done one already, and I'm going to show you how I did it. You can turn them with a nice chunky needle, but you're always in risk, even with a chunky needle, of piercing the fabric. So I use my hemostat clamps. They're like the surgical clamps. I mean, if you put in surgical clamps on Amazon or Google, it will come up with these. And they're absolutely brilliant for this sort of job. So I insert them so far down, probably about 4 or 5 inches. Yep, 4.5 inches. And then I clamp and then pull the fabric through. Now, it's always fiddly doing the first bit. This is the sort of fiddliest part. But once you've done this part, the rest is a doddle. And it really isn't too bad anyway. Even though it is a bit fiddly, it's not the worst. I'll make sure I'm doing it in camera shot, sorry. Right, like so. Just keep pulling through. And you just have to, you know, spend a little time to do it. And once you've gone through, the rest is much easier. So I just go so far down, clamp the fabric again, and pull through. And it is that easy. So get yourself some if you don't have them already. And get some nice chunky ones. I've got different sizes. I've got tiny little ones. So it depends on the job I'm doing as to what size I need. But these are my main clamps. And as you can see, it really is that easy to pull through. There we go. And now I'm going to press it with the seam going down the centre. So I shall press this and return to you. I've pressed the straps, and when I pressed them, I think really it would have been better to have pressed the seams open before I turned. It was a little bit fiddly, but I made sure that I pressed the seams open so that there was equal thickness rather than all the seam being one side. So yeah, I did it. I mean, it was doable, so I'm sure you'll be fine. And I'm getting my safety pin, and I'm just going to put it through at the end, like so. And now we need to thread it. And I only want to go so far in, so I'm going to thread away. Like so. And I know you know how to do something like this. I don't mean to make it sound like you're stupid, because I know that's not the case. Oh, I'm sure it isn't anyway. But because you need to not have the strap all the way, I wanted to show you how to do it so that you had equal amounts at each end. Because obviously you need to remove the safety pin. So keep going. And now I've gone inside, I only want to gently pull so that this is 3/4 of an inch in. Sorry, 1.5 inches in. So I'm just going to pull it gently, and I can feel it, and that's 1.5 inches. So I've gone to there. So now what I'm going to do is put another safety pin through all the layers so that the strap doesn't pull in any further. Then I come to the other end and I pull it through further than it needs to go because I need to get the safety pin off. So I do that, release the pin, and then pull the fabric. So that's equally spread, and that's how to add the webbing to your strap. If you find you've gone too far, all you need to do is push down. You can either put your hemostats in, like so, grip it, and just pull slightly, and then check, and so on. And you can do it that way. And that's how easy it is. I'm going to do the other one, and then I shall come back with the next step. So I've inserted the webbing, and I've got about 1.5 inches each end free from the webbing on both pieces. Once you're happy with the webbing and that it's exactly where you want it to be, top stitch down both sides of the straps at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And by top stitching, you've sewn the webbing in place, so it's no longer going to shift. So we put the straps aside. I will have put a note on the screen for you, but Nipa just mentioned to me that whereas we leave 1.5 inches each end on the large and the medium sized bags, on the small bags we only need to leave 1 inch, which I didn't realise because I haven't made that one. So I do apologise. But I will have put that on the screen. Okay, now we're doing the pocket. And what we need to do is fold the long edges together, right sides together, and we just need to sew down and along the bottom. Leave the top empty, unstitched. And we're going to do that at 1/4 inch seam allowance, not 3/8, 1/4. Okay, then we clip the corner where we've stitched to reduce the bulk in the corner, and then we're going to turn right side out. And I'm just going to push the corners gently. I really love the way that this pocket's designed. Very clever. And I'm going to want to press it. And because the seams can roll into each other, what I like to do initially is to just press the seam open or flat, both at the sides and the bottom. And then lay it flat. And press it. I'll just do both sides. Okay, and we're just the top edge, not the raw edge, but the top edge, we're just going to do a top stitch at 1/8 of an inch. I've top stitched the top, and now what we need to do is, with the raw edge at the top, we need to mark for the large bag and the medium bag 5 inches down from the top, and for the small bag 4 inches. And so here's my 5-inch line, and I'm just going to bring the stitched edge that's got the top stitching up to that line and clip in place. And we're going to stitch up the sides and all the way to the top, so we're top stitching. went over that a few times where the fold of the pocket is, just to reinforce it. And that's our pocket made. So nice handy little pocket. So we set that aside with the straps, and we're now going to stitch the main body of the bag. So what you're going to do is lay the two together, both your lining and the main panels, and you need to lay them right sides together. It may not look it, but there is a right and a wrong side on this as well, on this fabric. So I'm just making sure. So lay them together, and you can pin or clip them if you want to make sure that you are exact with where they are, and take them to your machine and stitch at 1/2 inch seam allowance. So making sure you're stitching at 1/2 inch seam allowance. And once you've stitched the top end, you need to stitch the bottom end also, and at 1/2 inch seam allowance. Once you've stitched the top and the bottom edges, turn it right side out. And you need to give the edges a good press. And what I'm going to do, which I forgot to do before I turned it, which is fine, it can be done this way, is to press the seams open. And do this with both seams. and this will give a much neater finish to the top edges of your bag. And then once we've done that, we then press the seams flat together, and they're not rolling into each other because we've pressed them open, so it just makes for a much nicer seam. The only thing about doing this type of pattern is it can be very unforgiving if you don't stitch straight. So I'm very relieved that the lines are all straight still, because it would have been easy to go off and not have that straight edge. So you do have to be very careful when you're stitching such a definite pattern that your seams are kept straight. Okay, and now what we need to do next is to base stitch down the long edges, down the sides. Okay, we're basting at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, just making it a longer stitch. And the reason it's so narrow is because this is forming part of the French seam. Us dressmakers know what a French seam is. Bag makers may not, because it's not something we generally use, but it's a lovely way of doing a seam, especially if you don't have an overlocker, which I do have, but before my overlocker days I did used to make clothes with French seams. It's important to make sure you're lining the sides up neatly. If you're not confident about doing it like this, put pins in and make sure it's all together nicely. And we do both sides. Always making sure that the seam edges match up. quite slippery fabric actually. I probably would have been better off using pins, but I was being lazy. Right, once the sides have been stitched, you need to mark a line. So you find your top edge and your lining side that you're marking. So the top edge and the lining side facing up. And you need to mark down for the small bag 2 inches, and for the large and medium 3 inches down from the top. And I mark a line across, and then I also want to find the centre, and it's now measuring 12 centre in the middle. And there, that's the central line, that line down there. And then we want to do 2.5 inches either side. We need to measure. So I think you can see the lines that I've marked. So we've marked our pieces, and we just need to fold the top down, and the top edge needs to come down and meet the line that we drew. And I'm just going to use clips to hold that in place momentarily. So we've clipped along there, and now we need to get our straps, and we lay the first strap, and we need to lay it so that the seam is facing down, because eventually we're going to be flipping it up, so we want the seam to be facing down to start with. And we lay the strap so that the inside part of the strap is next to the line that we've drawn, and then you insert it to the top, and you should just feel the start of the webbing, which I do, which is good. We do the same on this side. So that the straps are like so. So we've lined them up, and I want to make sure that nothing shifts in a moment. What we now do is fold it up. Like so. I'm just going to pin it. Let's hook up that way. Pin both sides. And do the same on the other side. And this is why we only do the webbing so far down to the strap, because if we did it all the way to the end of each strap, you would have a very, very thick base of the handle, and as I said earlier, you'll find it hard to stitch through. So it's best, I'm just not happy with moving, I'm just going to move that down a bit, it wasn't quite where it should be. Whereas this way will be much easier for you to sew. So I'm just going to pin these in place and I shall return. So I've pinned all the way along, and now we need to get our pocket that we made earlier, and with the pocket right side up, we just need to slip it in between the handles to the top, space it evenly, and pin in place. Like so. And now we're going to stitch along the top folded edge and along the edge, the folded part of the edge. So I shall take it to the machine and go from there. I'm going to stitch the folded edge first, and as this is basically the top stitched part, I'm going to stitch on the top side, on the outer side rather than the lining side, just so that I know it's a neater finish. And turn my stitching back down to a shorter stitch. And you stitch at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then we want to stitch again on this part. So I'm making sure that I can see where I'm going to stitch, and I shall turn it round. There's a lot of fabric. You have to pass it through the machine. Okay, so I've stitched, that's the outside and that's the inside, and you may have noticed something, or you may not have, but the pocket's not attached. And I like to own up to my mistakes. When I pulled the pins out, not thinking, the pocket fell onto the floor. All is not lost, it doesn't matter, because I can add it to the other end. If, however, you've done something on your bag that you need it to be on this side, then just, you'll have to unstitch and do it again. But I wanted to show you, I'm human, these mistakes happen, and you're not alone. So, thankfully, I have a second chance. So I need to do exactly what I did at the other end. Obviously, if your pocket has been attached, you won't need to attach the pocket on this end. So I shall come back when all that's done. So both ends are done now, and the pocket has been attached, and it is meant to hang free, so don't worry about that. And what I've done now is I've marked crosses where the handles are, and I'm just going to stitch to reinforce the handles. So I'm going to start with following the first diagonal line. And then I'm going to do straight down. And then I have to move all the fabric round, and I'm going to come up to this corner diagonally, and then straight down this side. And then along the bottom again in the stitching that we've already done. And that's in place, and that's some line that I did that was wrong in the first place, so I redrew it. So that's the stitching done, and I've done both handles there, and I'm going to do the other end, and then we'll show you how to put the bag together. Once you've stitched your crosses on the handles or put your rivets on, you need to fold the bag with lining sides together and the outer fabric on the outside, and match the edges up really evenly. Make sure that they are dead flat against each other and at the top. And then what you need to do, depending on the size of the bag you're making, depends on where you add your line. If you're doing the large tote, then you need to mark your line 6 inches from the bottom and mark a line at the sides, both sides. If you're making the medium tote, do 4 inches, and if you're making the small tote, do 3 inches. And so once you've marked your lines, pick up all the layers and fold up to the line. And then clip it in place. Both sides, and we're going to stitch down the sides. Now I've overlocked my edges, so I don't want to trim the edges and lose the overlocked edges, so I'm just going to stitch at 1/4 inch seam allowance. If you haven't overlocked your edges, you can stitch at 3/8 inch seam allowance as per the directions on the paperwork. And then once you've stitched down 3/8 inch seam allowance, trim to 1/4 inch. But because I've overlocked, I'm actually going to stitch at 1/4 inch. Once you've stitched down the sides, you should end up with a bag that's got a bottom like that. And now, this is where the French seam comes in. We need to turn our bag wrong side out. So we're now looking at the lining. And just push everything out, all the corners out and the edges out. And make sure you've caught everything in, all your raw edges, that there's nothing showing on here. So just make sure it's all neat and there, like I say, there's nothing poking through, which I have. There's nothing. Just cut the loose thread. Yeah, so I'm happy with all of that. And now we just need to stitch the last part, which is down the sides. And I'm just checking the seam allowance actually, because I can't remember. Yeah, 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So that's what you need to do now. Stitch both sides, 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So you're basically catching this seam in. Okay, so making sure the seam isn't completely folded in on itself. So once you've stitched down both sides, turn the bag to right sides out again. And then with the bottom corner, you can push it out like that. And that's your corner, box corner done. It's quite a nice looking thing, isn't it? And that's your bag done. It is as nice and easy, as simple as that. And you've encompassed your rough seam edges into the French seam. And that's it. All I need to do now is give it a press, get rid of all the invisible heat ink that disappears with the heat. And I've got my little shopping bag, or large shopping bag. It's quite floppy, but that's by choice. If I'd have interfaced it, it would have been a bit stronger, but I didn't need to. I mean, there's 2 layers of good quality fabric. It's thicker than cotton, and I'm happy with it as it is. It will just sit nicely in the car, folded up like that, in with all the other bags. Or even like that with all the other bags, and I'm a happy bunny. So that's how you make it. I hope you enjoy making yours, and happy stitching.